Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say, just listening to what my honourable colleague says, that she clearly hasn't even read the bill. Because she doesn't, she clearly has not read what the bill actually says, and perhaps that is because...
Interrupt the Honourable Minister. Do we want to hear the Minister answer the question?
Not to bring disorder to the House.
And perhaps that is because the Conservative Party has been filibustering the committee for 11 different meetings, 6 weeks of filibuster, not allowing discussion, not allowing witnesses to actually have a conversation, which is what committees are supposed to do. It is a shameful waste of taxpayers' resources, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Madam Speaker, we had over 133 witnesses, 120 hours of hearings on the issue of the energy transition. The Conservatives had nothing to say to any energy worker. When we brought the Canadian Labour Congress, the Conservatives shut them down. When the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers came, the Conservatives shut them down. When the Carpenters Union came to speak, they shut them down. When the International Trade Union Confederation came, they shut them down. The Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs, they shut them down. It was New Democrats who brought representatives from the coal transition. The Conservatives had no interest at all in hearing from workers. So this legislation is about workers having a seat at the table, and the Conservatives have turned to gong show gibberish politics to stop workers from having a seat at the table. I want to ask my honourable colleague why he thinks the Conservatives have fallen down the rabbit hole of conspiracy in attempts to stop workers from having a seat in a discussion about their future.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, thank you. Thank you, my honourable colleague, for the question. I would say that it is also shameful that they have looked to exclude workers from across the country in a conversation that is really very much about the future of their jobs, the future of their industries. It is about building a strong economy for the future, one that will create jobs and economic prosperity in every part of the country. It is shameful that they have actually worked very actively to ensure that workers have no voice in this conversation.
Questions et questions of the Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
Madam Speaker, and it's something that's been in floor of this House of Commons, been in front of committee, but there has been a moving target here on this, particularly with the Supreme Court's reading on the Impact Assessment Act that has reopened this as far as whether there is any validity to this law whatsoever, or if we're going to just end up putting the country into another couple of years of actual legal morass where nothing gets done here. Nothing gets done for any workers in Canada, nothing gets done for any projects in Canada, nothing gets done for any provinces in Canada, nothing gets done in Canada. And this government is happy with that. This government is used to that. This government has created that atmosphere across this country. And that's what has to stop in this country, Madam Speaker, the fact that we can actually get things done here again. This is one more laden bill that basically says we don't want anything to happen in Canada, but don't worry, workers, we're on your side, even though you won't have any jobs at the end of our agenda here. It's a ridiculous scenario. We need to have it examined clearly in this House of Commons, particularly in respect to the new laws that have come down, interpretations from the Supreme Court of Canada, to see if this is actually legitimate legislation in the first place, Madam Speaker. Can the Minister stand up and tell us if he's actually got anything resembling an advance ruling on this?
Right. Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I would say that my honourable colleague clearly has not read the bill. What the bill is a transparency mechanism that establishes a partnership council that is of labour, industry, Indigenous peoples and youth to provide advice to the government on how we actually work together to build an economy that's going to create jobs and economic prosperity. There is nothing across jurisdictions in the bill, and I would invite my honourable colleague to read it. But I would also say, and I will quote, the Sustainable Jobs Act represents an important opportunity for Canada to shape our future and create jobs by providing the resources that the world needs, including energy, food, and minerals. That is the President of the Business Council of Alberta.
There you go.
The Honourable Member, l'Honourable Député Jonquière.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will take this opportunity to ask the Minister a question. I agree with him that it's very unfortunate what we've seen at the Natural Resources Committee recently. However, in Bill C-50, unfortunately, the government has not taken into consideration that there's an agreement between Quebec and Ottawa, a labour agreement. Something needs to be done about this. I'd like to hear from the minister if he agrees that these workforce training agreements made in the past between Ottawa and Quebec must be taken into consideration. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The bill seeks to better position the government so it can take more effective measures in areas of federal jurisdiction. It will allow the provinces to work within their jurisdiction. We will continue to cooperate closely with the provinces and territories, including Quebec.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you. Throughout this time that we've been at committee, in fact, we are still on the same meeting that began on October 30th, and we have heard all sorts of conversations about strawberry milkshakes being drunk through straws and muscle cars. But what we haven't actually had is an opportunity to hear from workers about what their perspectives are on the Sustainable Jobs Act. And I was wondering if perhaps the minister could help us to have a better perspective from his conversations with organized labor over the past 6 weeks about how they're feeling about the delays that we've been seeing in committee and what they're hoping to see.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you very much for the question. I would say that Labour and workers across the country are incredibly frustrated with the circus-type antics of the Conservative Party, holding up discussion and debate, holding up and preventing witnesses from appearing before the committee. The President of the Canadian Labour Congress recently said, by holding up this bill continuously, the Conservatives are not speaking for workers on this issue. They are not making sure workers have a choice or ability to have robust debate as they are holding up this bill. It's incredibly frustrating. It is disrespectful to workers who are worried about their futures, and it is disrespectful to communities. We need to see it stop.
That's a quote. The Honourable Member for Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is absolutely disrespectful that this government has decided that instead of actually taking the time to have a conversation, they are just going to ram this bill through. This is not a just transition, but they've just decided to repurpose and change the names around. I represent thousands of energy workers in this strong province, and I often say when Fort McMurray works, Alberta works. When Alberta works, Canada works. This piece of legislation is going to severely impact this ability. And for the government to now try and ram this piece of legislation through without actually having fulsome conversation and debate on this is absolutely disrespectful to the thousands of energy workers I represent and the thousands of energy workers that are throughout Canada. And I wonder why the minister is so afraid to have this conversation go so that we can actually have some conversation and some debate, and why they're deciding to instead ram closure down and shut down any form of debate on this bill. Thank you, Madam.
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of revisionist history in there. The committee has been blocked by the Conservative filibuster for 6 weeks. 11 meetings, about 25 hours. The committee has been stuck on the same meeting since October the 30th. The committee could have heard from witnesses on both bills, C-49 and C-50, that were in front of the committee, but the Conservatives blocked it. In terms of the work that we are doing to actually ensure that there is a prosperous future for every province and territory in this country, I would point the honourable member to the announcement of the $11.5 billion plant with Dow Chemicals in Fort Saskatchewan, where we worked collaboratively with the government of Alberta. The Air Products hydrogen facility near Edmonton, where we worked collaboratively with the government of Alberta. And the CCUS tax credit, where we've worked very collaboratively with the government of Alberta, which will create thousands of jobs going forward in that member's riding.
Wow. The Honourable Member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There are two bloc parties in this House of Commons. There's the Bloc Québécois and there's the Bloc Everything Party. I mean, the Conservatives have blocked every piece of legislation. Last Friday, they blocked the Canada-Ukraine trade deal. Now we see them blocking investments that would make a real difference in terms of clean energy and provide workers with more of a voice. We've seen them block as well dental care. We saw them block the grocery rebate. Everything that helps Canadians, Conservatives are there to block. And, Madam Speaker, it is simply untenable that over a 6-week period, Conservatives were blocking workers' representatives from testifying, refusing to let them speak, refusing to let them have that conversation about the bill. And now, with obviously not a single Conservative even having read the bill, we get all these kind of outlandish conspiracy theories rather than any sort of criticism about the bill itself. So my question to the Liberal minister who's before us now is, why do the Conservatives block everything that comes before the House? Why do they refuse? Why have they gone rogue? Why have they become so extremist under the member from Carleton?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you to the Honourable Member for the question. I mean, I think it's true that under the current leader of the Conservative Party, it's become the party of tear everything down. There is not one constructive suggestion that we see coming forward with the Conservative Party of Canada. Certainly, they have worked to ensure that there is no conversation about this bill. They have done the same thing with respect to the development of offshore wind. They would cancel the development of offshore wind in Atlantic Canada, which will create thousands and thousands of jobs and economic prosperity. They would cancel the Darlington Small Modular Reactor project with the Government of Ontario. They would actually cancel the Volkswagen battery plant, which will create thousands of jobs. They would cancel many of the investment tax credits, so they would be canceling Dow and Air Products and a whole range of other things. I mean, at the end of the day, they need to find a pathway to actually have a constructive conversation about the environment and of the economy, not simply complaining with no constructive suggestions whatsoever.
The
Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I heard my colleague earlier say that there are two blocs here, the Bloc Québécois and the Bloc Everything Party, but I wouldn't support that thesis. I see two very well-defined trends at this time. There's the Bloc Québécois on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are three parties that stand up for oil companies with great fervor. Why do I say that, Madam Speaker? This bill initially was going to be about the just transition, a word that seemed a little bit too difficult for the government. They preferred to talk about sustainable jobs. We are the only country, I would say, in the West that wants to use the term sustainable jobs rather than the term just transition. Why? Because they're scared of Alberta's reaction. If they're scared of Alberta's reaction, it's because they don't have enough courage to take the necessary action to fight climate change. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's very important that we have a conversation about the future for an economy that will be prosperous and present in a low emissions future. And that is the conversation for sustainable jobs. This is something that's very important all over the country. And we are working together with the provinces and territories to build an economy that will be strong and prosperous in the future.
For Waterloo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's indeed an honour and privilege to rise in this place and to be able to speak on behalf of the constituents of the riding of Waterloo. Just today I was meeting with Faith Climate Justice, a group who's really concerned about the future of the environment, the earth, as well as the economy. And they often ask about the work that we do in this place, and I had shared with them that I was actually at the Natural Resources Committee, and rather than debating and discussing important topics, including the future of Canadians and where they will work and how we take care of our environment, we got to see a show by conservative after conservative after conservative filibustering. And today we're hearing that they want to talk about it. And so what I would like to hear from the minister is, why are we having to use closure to actually get this legislation passed so that we can actually debate it, as well as what does this legislation mean for the future of the environment as well as the economy when it comes to Canadians? Thank you, Madam.
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Madame le Président, and thank you very much for the question. We are having to move towards closure because the committee has been blocked by a Conservative filibuster, the behaviour of which Parliament has never seen. For 6 weeks, for 11 meetings. The committee has been stuck on the same meeting since October the 30th. There have been multiple witnesses that could have been called to actually have a robust conversation about this bill. The committee could have focused on trying to ensure that it was understanding and looking to ways in which to strengthen the bill, but instead we end up with not being able to have a conversation. This is a really important bill. Yes, it's important for us to take climate change seriously, to not deny the science of climate change, which some of my honourable colleagues in this House seem to do. But at the end of the day, it's critically important for us to move forward to build an economy that will be prosperous, will create thousands of good economic good jobs in every province and territory in Canada.
The honourable member for Coastal Bay Central Notre Dame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Oil and gas workers like Luke and Steve in Coastal Bay Central Notre Dame put their faith in me in the last election. Yeah. Luke and Steve are 2 of the 5,500 that have been displaced in Newfoundland and Labrador's offshore oil and gas industry since this Liberal government turned on it and destroyed it. And now this piece of legislation is more of the same to destroy the livelihoods of these people in my province. And I'm not going to take it, Madam Speaker. I'm here to represent them. And like guys like Luke and Steve would have came to committee and testified and gave their point of view after 20-odd years in the oil and gas industry, they would have spoke up for the people, that their peers, and they would have let this minister know exactly what this piece of legislation is going to do to them, and the suffering that they've endured by having to become rotational workers to leave their families. It's unbelievable, and now they're faced with more uncertainty.
That's right.
So will this minister have the guts to let this piece of legislation come before a committee so stakeholders like Luke and Steve can come in and give their point of view, Madam Speaker?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, thank you very much for the question. And yes, I would have welcomed having Luke and Steve come to the committee if the Conservatives had actually let any witnesses speak at the committee. So yes, that would have been very valuable, as well as having stakeholders from across the country have a conversation with MPs at the committee, as committees are actually supposed to do. But the committee was prevented from actually having any conversations because of a ridiculous filibuster by these Conservatives that have not allowed people in this House to do their jobs. Taxpayers should be angry, very angry at them for the waste of taxpayer money that we have seen. With respect to the oil and gas sector in Newfoundland and Labrador, that remains an important part of the Newfoundland economy. It will continue to be an important part of the Newfoundland economy. They have focused very much on decarbonization. It is actually some of the lowest carbon content oil that is produced anywhere in North America. It is certainly an important element, but there are others, like the development of offshore wind, which this member is opposing through the opposing C-49. And I would invite him to have a conversation with his Premier when he's here tomorrow about his opposition to C-49.
That's a good idea. The honourable member